Hi everyone, my name is Jackie Ocaña, and today I will be presenting a UX case study called COVID Care. Now, COVID Care originally came to fruition because on March 11th, 2020, the world changed completely. On that day, people were running to retail stores and stocking up on toilet paper, canned foods, but more importantly, disinfectant. A year later, March 12th, 2021, we are still combating COVID-19. Now, personally, this project is really important because I always try to do everything possible to keep myself and my community safe, whether that be my neighborhood, my friends, my family. I want to make sure I am in the know on what is going on in society in regards to COVID-19. Now, if we are still living this pandemic a year later, we can say that it's not going to go anywhere for quite a bit. Now, in order to combat what I believe was a pivotal moment in human society, I went through a design process. Now, this design process started with user research. In user research, I helped conduct interviews that answered several questions and helped me understand what the user really wants versus what I think they want. Next up was ideation. In ideation, I brainstormed on different ideas on how to solve their particular problem. And finally, in design, I created an interactive solution to address this problem. Now, when I initially started, my suspected problem was the area of routines and habits. I suspect that people do not check for COVID-19 updates regularly because none of this information is streamlined to their specific location. Now, this was just a hunch from what I had seen around me because a lot of people at the time when I conducted this research were saying that there's too many different things going on and they don't know where to get this information from. Whether it was from online, social media, the news, there were too many options and people were saying too many different things. Now, once I conducted user research, or in my case, interviews, I was able to understand exactly what people were thinking. To help prepare for interviews, I created an interview guide with a list of objectives. These objectives were to understand how often news was consumed, understand the attitude of COVID-19 related news, and understand how, where, and how often the user got their COVID-19 news updates, and lastly, identifying pain points in finding COVID-19 related news. Prepping for interviews was a very essential step because depending on the information that I would receive would guide the project into the potential solution. So really being prepared for this was extremely, extremely important. So my key insights and takeaways from these interviews were these three quotes. I don't even want to check anymore. Users were really saying that there was too much information and they were just frustrated with the whole process of getting information. Next would be vaccination info is my top priority. At the time when research was being conducted, vaccination was not new. We knew it was coming, but it was starting to come out to more of the public. In this case, it was phase, I believe, 1A and 1B workers, so food workers, teachers, etc. And then the last point was checking the county website. All the users had this particular thing in common, which was they wanted a reputable source for where they were receiving their information. So their go-to was going to their local county website to receive this info. My biggest takeaway from this was that users actually knew where to get the information from. I thought users were not going out of their way to find the information regarding COVID-19 because they were just overwhelmed and they would ignore the topic. But actually, the users were very well informed on the topic. In fact, a bit overwhelmed with the topic. So my original suspected problem was debunked, and I came up with the actual problem, which was after doing the research. The problem I observed is that people in California check for COVID-19 updates from several sources because they need both national and local information regarding testing, vaccination, and the recovery progress. This analysis caused Californians to feel overwhelmed with information. Now, knowing this actual problem of what people actually were feeling really was a turning point because I could have gone in to solve my suspected problem, which was people were not checking for COVID updates because it was inconsistent due to a lack of streamlined information available, but I wouldn't be solving the actual problem that people were experiencing. Now, once I interviewed everyone, I created a person, also known as a primary persona. This primary persona is created using all the information that I got from interviews, which helps the creators or the people involved in this process to do three things: create empathy with the user, helps generate ideas for design solutions, and helps identify the scope of what the team should really be focusing on and what they should not be focusing on. I was able to create Matthew, as you see on the screen, through this process called affinity mapping. Affinity mapping involves rewatching the interviews that were conducted and taking the information that each participant said and writing them down on sticky notes. Every single participant had their own colored sticky note, but you did not identify which sticky note was related to who. Now, once that was all done, you would stick all of the sticky notes onto one whiteboard or wall. Once you have all that information put together, you started moving them around into categories or similarities. For example, in my case, I had categories regarding where people received their information from, the emotions that they were feeling. And if we wanted to go with the emotions category, we could even break it down into another category that was even more specific, in this case, positive and negative feelings. So once there were no more categories to be broken down, you were able to take a step back and look at all this information right in front of you in one concise place. After this process, I went through ideation. And the ideation process, it's important to really figure out how to solve this problem that the users are experiencing. And to help solve this problem, how might we questions are created. Now, how might we question helps brainstorm how to find a solution to their problem. My three how might we questions were: how might we present relevant COVID-19 updates for the US so that the user does not feel burnt out? How might we deliver personalized, informative, and concise information about COVID-19 so that fact-checking is not necessary? How might we show that mask wearing, social distancing, and other practices make communities feel safer so that we are closer to normalcy? Now, what's key about these questions is that they're very open-ended. They don't just gear you towards one direct solution. These questions really open up possibilities. Now, in this process, I would spend about 5 minutes with each question and just write down as quickly as possible any potential solutions without judging the actual solution being written down. That eventually comes down later in the road. What's very important about this process is to keep it open-ended. And as you see on my screen, question number 1 is presented on the screen, and there are sticky notes with different ideas of how I thought the problem could be solved. Now, once I was complete with this whole process, I took my top idea and I created a hypothesis. My hypothesis was, I believe that setting up my own notification preferences will result in less stress and more control over the unpredictable COVID-19 climate that will allow my persona Matthew to feel less overwhelmed. Now, this hypothesis was based off of my persona's goals and needs. In this particular case, it is having more control over their notifications and using that to help the user feel less overwhelmed. Now, once we got there, we would actually build out a story on how the solution would be used. Now, in these images, we have what is called a storyboard, which does exactly that, walks you through what the user would experience and how they would use the app in this particular case. Now on the right, we see that Matthew is in his home office. He's on a Zoom call with some coworkers, and his coworkers are talking about how they stay informed with COVID-19. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see that Matthew actually says that he's very overwhelmed with all the information and he doesn't even know what to do. Now on the right-hand side, you can see that a coworker talks about an application that's actually has helped him not feel as overwhelmed, because as you can see in the middle row on the right hand side, it allows you to set your preferences on how often you want to receive notifications regarding COVID updates and what time you want to receive these updates. On the bottom, you can see that his coworker's raving about this application, and he talks about a specific feature where he gets to vent and reflect and journal on what he's feeling and how he's feeling. Then once they're done talking about the topic, Matthew actually leaves the meeting. He's done for the day. He has some downtime. Once he's in bed on his phone, he actually realizes that he should probably inform himself on the COVID news. So he goes onto the app and he gets a summary of what happened in the world today. Matthew says it was very fast and simple. And once he gets to the end of all that information, he gets a little pop-up that says if he would like to yell or shout into the void. Now, Matthew was like, that sounds kind of nice. Let's check it out. He goes to the screen where he types his information, and once he submits it, he feels a little relieved because he was able to express his emotions about the situation, the COVID situation, which he might not have been able to do before. Now, after the storyboarding process, we go into the actual designing of the product process. Now, in this process, you can see that there were 3 features of COVID Cares. On the first one, you see that there's an option to log in and create. It's very simple, straightforward. User clicks on what they want, and then they walk through the rest of the process and it goes to the preferences screen. Now the preferences screen, as I said before, is very important because every single person has their own preference to how often they want to receive their news. Now in the last screen, you can see that the user has an option to go back and revisit information that was shared with them. What's key about this is that after the screen, the user cannot go back in to check these updates. It is their last opportunity to check for an update. This decision was actually made because a lot of people tend to overconsume information. And so not being able to go back and check this information helps the user relax a little bit more. Now that you've seen some of the key characteristics of COVID Cares, I'll walk you through what the actual prototype is like.